Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Dose, where we speak to individuals with lived mental health experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. And today we are speaking with Juliet about her experience with anxiety from a very young age, which eventually manifested into OCD with a variety of different themes, particularly a chronic fear of vomit. However, Juliet has now used her experiences to become an OCD specialist therapist and hopefully help others. I hope you enjoy the show and thank you so much for listening.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you, Emily?
I'm good, thank you, Juliet. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I'm so excited to speak to you today. I know it took a bit of a while to get some time in with the time difference.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. I've been really looking forward to this. It's been long anticipated.
I forgot to mention it's not only the time difference, it's the tree situation as well.
Yeah, that it really you can write a complaint to Mother Nature if you'd like.
Yeah, do you want to explain a little bit to the listeners actually while we're on here what happened?
Oh yeah, so Emily and I were planning to meet, and then a tree fell on my house and really caused a lot of hiccups with scheduling and with everything. I've been actually living out of a hotel for the last 4 weeks, and it has been a great learning opportunity for navigating insurance, uncertainty, stress, while also working full time and starting my own practice, also as a new homeowner. So it's been quite an experience, but things have somewhat settled down. So I'm really happy that we could meet. It's a nice distraction.
I can't believe how you've managed that. Whereabouts exactly are you based again?
So I'm based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is, if you look at the state of Michigan, right around here.
Okay.
I think. No, maybe around here. Around here. Yeah.
And you always lived in that area?
I have, yes. So I grew up in Ann Arbor, went to Wayne State, which is in Detroit, Michigan, for undergrad and graduate school, and then lived in Detroit for a little while, and then came back to the Ann Arbor area to work.
And what did you study at university?
So I received a bachelor's degree in social work and health psychology. And then I went to the Wayne State School of Social Work for a master's degree in clinical social work with a specialization in child welfare and cognitive behavioral therapy.
And do you use that specifically today for your practice?
I do. I actually first learned about OCD treatment through one of my classes in graduate school. And I use a lot of the tools that I learned from like that specific class in my practice today, which is cool because a lot of the things from graduate school feel very unapplicable to work in the day-to-day.
That's so cool.
Some of the clinical stuff I learned was really, really applicable and helpful.
Wow. Like I studied psychology for both undergraduate and masters. And it was very, very much theory based. So everything was just studies, why things happen based on theory as opposed to how to clinically apply that into settings. So that's maybe there's a different modular curriculum in America that there is in the UK, because it's very different here, which is a shame. But that's really interesting. So obviously you're a therapist now, which we'll go into a little bit more throughout this podcast. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit more about why we're here today, and that is all about your experience with mental health. So what is your first sort of memory of mental health and mental health issues and where it all began?
That's a really great question. So I've kind of been brought up in a family where my mom was a therapist and my dad was a nurse, and he worked on a psychiatric unit for teens and adults. So I have always, like from day one, I can remember my parents talking about work and therapy and mental illness and mental health. From a personal side of things, I think my whole life I have been a very, very like anxious person. And that started out when I was probably an infant because I refused to be held by anyone other than my mom. And I would scream for like 3 hours every single night before going to bed because I just could not be soothed. And it kind of started there, and it's just kind of continued in different forms throughout my life. I used to have a security blanket as a kid, and throughout the first few years of my life, I would chew on it at night, and my mom would come into the room in the morning and there would be like these shreds of the blanket on the floor. So she would have to like cut the blanket so I wouldn't accidentally like bite off a piece and choke in my sleep. So my security blanket became this very small piece of fabric. And I mean, if that is not evident of someone who is experiencing a lot of distress and anxiety, I don't know what else is. So I remember thinking that everyone felt that way. And I remember kind of being in situations at school or at home where I would just feel like terror about the most seemingly small things. But to me at the time, it felt like I was always like standing on a cliff and something bad was going to happen. And actually, some of my earliest memories are of like thinking that my parents were going to die. And I would like visualize being somewhere by myself and my parent would have just died. And I would have to somehow like figure out how to get myself back home. So I would imagine like, what would it be like to drive? I was like 4. So I would imagine myself like driving in the car, somehow figuring out, it was before cell phones because I'm kind of old. So I would be like, how could I get back home to my phone to call 911? So that way my dead parent who's like in the river somewhere could get taken care of. So my whole life I've been, there was a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And, I think because my family has been pretty aware of like mental health and mental illness, my parents really tried their best to support me with talking about my feelings and with reassurance and with trying to encourage me to like step out of my comfort zone. But as life progressed and I had to have more separation from my parents, like going to school full time, my anxiety kind of turned into this like chronic fear of vomit. So like this emetophobia where I was really, really scared that, either I would throw up or somebody would throw up. And that was as far as the fear went. It wasn't like they're going to throw up and then they're going to die, or they're going to throw up and then it's going to smell. It was just like the event of the throw up was like the worst fear.
Wow.
And it got to the point where I developed a lot of like compulsions or safety behaviors that I felt I had to do before school, at school, and after school to prevent this fear from coming true. And at first it was something that was kind of manageable and I was able to go on with going to school and hanging out with friends. But it got to the point in like 3rd or 4th grade where I didn't even want to leave my house because there were so many possibilities for coming in contact with vomit. And that was around the time my parents were like, this feels a little bit different than just a kid who's more stressed out. She needs to go to a therapist.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what brought me to therapy the first time.
Yeah. Quick question before we delve a bit deeper into that. What were some of the compulsions that you were doing at the time?
Yeah, so I always have asked for reassurance. I think that's been the biggest one. So before school, I would ask my mom, am I going to throw up today? Or is someone going to throw up today? And she would do what I think a lot of parents do in that situation. And they say like, no, like, of course not. Or like, you're healthy, you're fine. Which in the moment, it kind of helped me feel better. But it didn't really give me practice
It's not
of
enough, is
sitting
it? To
sitting
stop
with that
whatever you're
uncertainty. Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
You know, at one point I went to a doctor, this like holistic doctor, and she like asked me these questions, and she ended up giving me this like remedy that would help me not get sick, which in retrospect, I'm sure really fueled this anxiety too.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, if I take this and if I ask my mom, and then I remember I had to, there were only certain times I could go to the bathroom at school. So I would like have this regimented way of asking the teacher if I could go to the bathroom. And then it went from vomit to vomit and diarrhea. So it was like, now I'm not just worried about vomit, I could also have diarrhea. So I had all these things of like asking to go to the bathroom. If somebody was sick, I like couldn't talk to them for a really long time after. So I can remember every single person I have ever seen throw up. I can remember where I was sitting. I can remember like what the whole day looked like before and after. And then for like, it sounds awful, but whenever I see these people now, I'm like, oh yeah, you threw up in second grade. I remember what color it was. I remember where I was sitting.
Wow.
So a lot of avoidance. And I also had a lot of like, kind of mental like reviewing and checking. So I would go through like, what did I eat today? If I did throw up, would it be like really gross, or would it maybe be less gross?
Wow.
So there were a lot of things, and most of
Did
them.
you ever throw up at the time during this period?
You know, maybe like once, but no, like it was so unfounded because I've never thrown up in public. I've never thrown up at school. Like my worst fear, it's never actually come true. But it was, yeah, you would think maybe there was like trauma that happened with throwing up. No, just one day I was like,
Nothing.
what if I'm terrified of throw up? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've had weird thoughts before in the past, and it's like, where has this even come from? Like, there is literally no, this has just literally come out of the middle of nowhere, this fear of something. So I can completely understand. I feel like I've heard of that before. Is there is a name for it?
Yeah, so it's called emetophobia. Emetophobia.
Yeah.
So I guess you emit something. And it's really, really common in kids, especially kids, with anxiety and OCD. But it's technically like a separate thing. It's one of the obsessive-compulsive related disorders. And for a lot of people, it kind of only focuses on like throwing up or like getting sick. But for a lot of people, they also have other like obsessive fears and anxieties that show up as well. And for me, this was just kind of like the beginning.
Okay.
But it was.
So, yeah. So, sorry, but so I guess from where we were before, you had this this fear around vomiting. You went to to therapy. What happened after that?
So I remember kind of starting to talk to my therapist about this fear. And I think at that time, I think it was kind of like when you open the can of worms, you realize that there's so much more there. So I started talking about like the vomit stuff, and it quickly became evident that there were a lot of other things I was worried about that I didn't even tell anybody because I was like so scared of them. So we started talking, and it kind of came up that I was also really, really scared of like knives and of like dying by suicide, or of worrying that like I was going to hurt my family or my pets. And so I remember my therapist really did a lot of good work with me around like not doing as much reassurance seeking. I remember she would have me draw out the things that I was scared were going to happen. So for as long as I can remember, I had a lot of avoidance. So I would try and avoid throw up. I would try and avoid knives. I would try and avoid whatever I was afraid of at the time. And she would give me homework, which I know now was exposure and response prevention therapy based, of every day for like 5 minutes, I would have to like go to my room or go somewhere private and draw out all of the things I was scared of. So I would like draw pictures of people throwing up, or I would draw pictures of like myself like stabbing myself or jumping off of a building or something like that. And I remember it was like really, really scary to do that, but it did really help. It was a small progress. It wasn't like immediate or anything like that, but the vomit fear for sure, like significantly decreased within probably like 6 months. And the other stuff was a lot more sticky, but it did really, really help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so was that it? Was that the point of sort of recovery, or was there anything after that?
Yeah, so that was kind of like the beginning. So I would say that for me, my like anxiety and OCD has kind of showed up in like spurts over my life. Yeah. So I noticed for the longest time, the summers were really hard for me. I really thrive on structure and having like things to distract myself, like not avoidance related distractions, but distracting myself with like behaviors that I value, that are fulfilling. And I'm an only child. Well, I actually do have a brother. He's a half brother. He's awesome, but he's like 25 years older than me. So I grew up as the only child in my house. And because of that, I spent a lot of my time alone during the summers. So I think I just had a lot more room to ruminate and get worried about things.
Yeah.
So after the vomit phobia was a little bit better, I started to just have a lot of other like obsessions and compulsions come up around harm and around my security blanket at the time. So the blanket that I nibbled down to the little small piece, I don't know what happened to that, but I had this other security blanket that was my mom's old nightgown that for some reason it smelled right and it felt really good.
Yeah.
And I started having a lot of like OCD symptoms about like ripping it or mutilating it or burning it, which was really distressing to me because I was probably in like 5th grade or so. So I was starting to get older.
How old's 5th grade?
Like 10.
Okay.
10, 11-ish, probably. Yeah. And so it was kind of interesting. And this goes to show kind of how with OCD specifically, sometimes the compulsions you feel you have to do to prevent something bad from happening end up kind of like becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy and kind of like make the bad thing more likely to happen in a way. So my OCD told me that in order to prevent me from mutilating my blanket, I had to every single night take a Sharpie and like put an X on my blanket. Or I had to like hold my blanket and like pull it, but not enough to rip it, but enough to like, which is like so weird because I was so scared that I was going to do this, but I felt like I had to, mutilate it to prevent myself from mutilating it. Which is so
completely mutilating
for
it.
OCD.
So like you almost, but not enough.
Yes. So, and then for me with like, mental health, moving on like into middle school and high school, I continued working with this therapist and I had a lot of anxiety just about friendships and kind of like my identity and who I was. I've come now to understand that more as like relationship OCD.
Yeah, would you mind going into that a little bit more? Because I do think I've had one other female on the podcast and she spoke about relationship OCD. I honestly look back at my high school experience and think that I can fully resonate with it. But I had a few people actually message me and talk about the relationship OCD section, specifically about friends and how much they related to that. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah. So we know OCD is like the doubting disorder. So it can make you doubt anything that you don't have certainty around. So relationships and friendships are a really understandable kind of target for a lot of OCD symptoms because we can never really know how we can never read someone's mind. We can never like take a test that says you are 100% a great match to be dating this person or to be friends with this person. So with relationship OCD, it's kind of like an umbrella term for any kind of obsessions and compulsions that are distressing, that involve relationships. So kind of feeling unsure about, do I truly want to be friends with this person? Are we really a good match? Or maybe are we not a good match? Or, is my partner right for me? Or maybe am I living a lie? Do I need to immediately break up with this person? Or kind of like comparing your friendships to other people's friendships and feeling like, well, if we're not going to the mall every Friday and doing X, Y, and Z, then we're probably not good friends and we shouldn't be friends anymore. And it can be really distressing because it can make you really doubt like the things that you value the most. And for a lot of people, we really put a lot of value in our friendships and in our relationships. So it can lead to a lot of loneliness and isolation and just like anxiety.
Did you lose friends in the process of relationship OCD?
I think for me, one thing I've done over the years is I just have been I was very guarded, and I kind of always felt like people didn't want to be my friend. So I was kind of burdening them to be around. So I wouldn't say I lost friends, but I probably lost opportunities to have like really meaningful friendships because I was a lot more comfortable just having very like surface level friendships where I could learn tons of things about them and it was fine. But like me sharing about my life or about what I was going through, it felt really scary.
What felt scary about it?
I think it was the fear that if I did open up and I did share things about myself, that, people wouldn't like me or people wouldn't want to be friends with me, or I would be burdening them by sharing about myself. And it's been something that I've really had to work against, as in work to overcome, because I've noticed like as a therapist, it feels very, very safe because it's all about the client. I'm there for them. We're working on their stuff. But I noticed that, at first when I started being a therapist, I started like really kind of leaning into that role in my friendships, which ended up making me feel kind of resentful because I don't want to just be focusing on someone else all the time. And ideally, I would love to have friendships where there's kind of an equal give and take. So I have to really like take off my therapist hat.
Which is hard.
Which is so hard, and not get into those roles in friendships now.
Yeah.
But I think I'm making good progress. I think I've done some really good work around that, and it's a process.
Did your friends at the time deal with it well? Or do you have any memory looking back at your school or at younger years when this was all happening that maybe they didn't handle it so well?
It's a really good question. And I'm not really sure about that. There was nothing specific.
That's good though.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you could be, if you're behaving in that way and you're questioning things and you're looking for reassurance, the friends that you have at the time might just think, wow, this person's so annoying. Obviously, I'm your friend. Obviously, I like you. And because the other conversation that I had with another female on this show, which was very similar to what I would have done, is the reassurance of like, are they actually my friend? Do they actually like me? And looking for those reasons why they don't like me. If they haven't texted back, is that because they don't like me? Probably yes, as opposed to are they busy or, those sorts of behaviors. And if you are friends with someone at the time and you're engaging in that can obviously be quite draining for them as well.
Of course. Yeah. And I think for me, I had more of that in romantic relationships with the like excessive reassurance seeking and like needing them to always be like validating for me that they did want to be with me, that they did like me, which I know probably was very confusing and difficult, especially for like both of us until I really knew what was going on. Because once you know what you're experiencing, it's a lot easier to kind of explain that to other people and ask for the support that you need that would actually be helpful.
And have you been in dating situations? Obviously, I know you've got a partner now, but have you been in dating situations where would you have immediately said in the first few dates, look, I've got OCD, and if you did, how would they handle that?
So I've always kind of known that I've had OCD, but it wasn't until graduate school that I really had a scope of like all of the ways that my like quirks, or I just always thought like, yes, I have OCD. And also there are these parts about me that are just kind of weird, but I didn't realize that they were like directly related to OCD. And once I did that, it was a lot easier for me to like communicate that to other people. But with relationship OCD, I didn't even realize that that was something I was experiencing until probably like 2 years ago. So my wife and I, we were both like kind of confused about these dynamics that were at play in our relationship for the first couple of years. And it makes me realize, like, if I didn't even realize that this was happening, how hard is it for partners of people with relationship OCD to be able to be like, this seems like it could be related to your OCD. And my wife is awesome. Like, she knows I have OCD. Like, that was definitely something we talked about right away, because it's kind of like, you know, let's share our stories and let's get to know each other better. And I'm sure I mentioned my vomit phobia just because, like, it's kind of a fun story. Like, now that I'm separated from it, you know, we can laugh about it. I know it can be really distressing, and I'm not trying to make light of that for the people who are experiencing it now. But humor has always been a big coping mechanism for me. So I'm sure I was cracking jokes about that early on. But to really realize the extent that relationship OCD was showing up, it did take a really long time for me.
What was the first recognition of that relationship OCD? How long have you been with your partner for a start, and how long? Because if it's only 2 years ago.
So we've been together almost 5 years.
Wow. So really, like 3 years into the relationship, you only realize that this is happening.
Yeah. So it was a lot of just doubts about kind of, are we right for each other? I would seek a lot of reassurance from my family members, from my friends, from my spouse. I had a lot of anxiety that like they were going to leave me or cheat on me. And I would get really, really like positive that something was going to happen. And it got to the point where I would like almost kind of control like her friendships and who she was spending time with, because I got so scared that like this friend might be the one who like she leaves me for, or something like that, which is very like, it's very different than who I am as a person, because I'm very trusting. I am not controlling at all. And I really value like everybody's autonomy. But in those times when I was so distressed, I'm sure it was very confusing for her. And also it probably just felt like very suffocating, because I would be like, well, who are you talking to? And what are you talking to them about? And do you think that like they're hot? And like, would you want to date them if we weren't dating? And all of these things that I felt like I had to ask.
Did that end up in any arguments at the time?
We definitely had a couple of like, I call them like circular conversations, where it's like, we've talked about this 500 times.
Yeah.
You've told me all the things that I've asked, but I'm still not feeling just quite right. So we need to keep talking about this until I feel reassured, like for sure. And understanding it now, it was just like, you know, me needing a specific thing to be said or done for my like OCD to check it off as like, okay, we're good now. And it was definitely stressful for both of us, because I would be like so distressed, and I would be like, you don't understand. Like, if you really cared about me, you would like really want to reassure me and make me feel better in these situations. And my wife would be like, I've literally said all the things that you're asking me to, but it's not clicking. So it's definitely confusing for both of us. So once we realized it, it was like, okay, now that we know that this is something that can happen, it doesn't really happen very much anymore, but we have a shared note on our iPhones that's like things to say to me when I'm having that OCD thing. And it's like,
nice.
It's like, this is what I need you to say. It's not like a compulsive related thing. It's like, I need you to say like, I'm sorry you're struggling. This sounds like OCD. Let me give you a hug. Or like, do you want me to get you some tea? Or I'm not going to answer that question right now because I love you. And once we had kind of like the framework for that, it made things feel a lot better because I was still feeling supported, even though it was frustrating to not get that like immediate relief. It's helped a lot.
Yeah, completely. And a question that I haven't actually asked on this podcast, but don't feel like you have to answer it, but I think it's quite interesting when you're talking about partners. Has your partner ever experienced a mental health related issue?
I know for sure that my partner has had a lot of like anxiety in the past and has some characteristics of OCD.
Right. Okay.
So there is kind of like an understanding of like, I know what it's like to have intrusive thoughts and I know what it's like to feel really, really anxious. And that does help because there is kind of just like a shared knowing where it's like,
I think that's it. Like, because it's almost, there's a balance, right? You can't both be too severely mentally unwell people together because that's just never going to work. It'd be toxic. You'd be feeding off each other. But if I look at my dating experiences, it's often been better when I've been with someone who has experienced something in their life. It doesn't have to be a mental health related issue specifically, but some sort of experience which allows them to empathize with other people. Because I think otherwise, like, it's great on the other side to have a partner who's never experienced anything, because I think they can be a little bit more rational and they don't have any of that judgments around mental health or anything. So they're just very direct and think very differently. But I think having someone who knows what it feels like can really help, especially when you're talking about the notes on the phone. Like, that's so nice. And probably there'll be people who you might have dated who's never experienced anything will just be think, why am I doing this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And so that's really nice.
Thank you. Yeah.
But so moving on from the relationship OCD experience, obviously the vomiting OCD, the suicide related OCD, was there any other themes that showed up in your life that you can think of specifically?
Yeah, I've had a lot of health related OCD. I think that's probably the kind of subset of OCD that still probably has the biggest like hold on me right now. So, I'm always planning my funeral. I'm always thinking about when I'm going to figure out that I'm dying. Like, that's kind of like a constant thing for me. And lately I've been trying to just like live on the edge, enjoy my life, just have as much fun as possible. Because I mean, we never know what's going to happen and life is short. So I've had a lot of health OCD, and I think a big thing that's helped with all of it is being on medications. So I actually didn't take any kind of medications for mental health until like a year and a half ago, which is really interesting to me too, because when I look back at my life, I don't have any memories of like having a time in life when I was not anxious about something. And I am a mental health professional. I'm a therapist. I was raised by people who know mental illness, but it never occurred to me that medications might be helpful until like a year and a half ago when my partner was like, hey, have you ever considered taking medications? And it wasn't something done in like a manipulative way of like, oh, have you ever considered taking meds? Like, you're unwell. But it was just a genuine question. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
Which we can unpack that. There's a lot of layers there.
I really want to unpack that actually. And I think one of the reasons why people don't take medication, including me as well, to be honest, is the stigmatization around it, and the whole, well, you should go to therapy and you should deal with what's actually going on inside and not rely on medication. You'll be on it for the rest of your life. And like, they're definitely things that you're told. They're things that I've been told and been ingrained in me. So even though I've spoke to so many people, would love to hear your experience on this in a second, but I've spoken to so many people who have said it has literally changed their lives when they've just bit the bullet and just been like, right, I'm just gonna try medication and see what happens. Obviously, don't use only medication. That's not the answer, but alongside therapy, it can literally be life changing.
Yeah, it is. I totally agree with everything you just said. And it has been, for me, like, I've had one of those experiences of like, I didn't really realize how much of my time was consumed by obsessions and compulsions, and also just like anxiety in general, until I kind of had some relief from that. And then it was like, I mean, it was, to say it was night and day is genuinely, it feels kind of like an over exaggeration, but it was like a night and day shift. Like, even my family members who never really realized how much I struggled, because a lot of it, I keep it very much inward. They were like, you're so much more present. We've never seen you this still. And it's kind of funny to say that now because I am moving a lot, but compared to before, like, I would be like getting up and walking around, and I just could not do one thing at a time. And it's been amazing. Like, the changes, I think you might have been about to say something. So I just
if you don't mind sharing, what is the medication that you're taking at the moment?
Yes, so I'm taking Zoloft, and I was really fortunate because for a lot of people, like, finding the right medication takes time, and there's a lot of like trial and error that often goes into it. For me, like, Zoloft has been really helpful for me, and I was really fortunate that my psychiatrist started with that, and that was her first thing that she wanted me to try. And it was like October of 2021. So it hasn't even been 2 years, but in the time I've been on it, I mean, I had relationship OCD for a long time, but after starting the medications, like, you know, my wife and I were like, let's get engaged. And then we got married. And then I, you know, started my own business and left the group practice that I was in. And I really was able to do my own work with an ERP therapist and kind of treat my OCD in a way that I had never really been able to, because I was so anxious that even talking about the things I was worried about felt too hard. So I was able to do this like new way of treating my own OCD. And then I was also going through a lot of really hard things in my life with family members and like other life changes, but I was still doing so much better than I had been doing for years before. So it has been really awesome, and I'm really privileged that it has worked so well for me at this point.
That's crazy. I mean, I've heard, so like, was there any period where you felt, because they say it has to get bad to get good again, and I don't know if that's the same with all medications, because the most common medication here, which I don't know if this is specifically for OCD, but I do know that people with OCD do take sertraline, which is which is obviously very common for depression, anxiety, and they say you have like 2 weeks where you feel absolutely terrible, almost feel like way worse than you were feeling originally, but then after those two weeks it gets better. Was that the same with you with the medication that you're on now?
You know, when I got to the point of kind of accepting the fact that I probably needed to be on medication, I was probably doing the worst that I had ever done in my life. So just for me knowing that like there might be a way to feel a little bit better, I think was like enough kind of mentally for me that I didn't really notice any like significant physiological effects from starting the medication.
Right.
I also started at like 5 milligrams, and it was like a very small dose, and I very slowly increased to where I'm at now. So for me, I really didn't have many side effects. It was just something that I was like, okay, here we go. Let's see how this works. Yeah.
And in terms of the OCD specifically, I know you mentioned that the relationship OCD has pretty much disappeared, but how is your OCD now whilst being on this medication?
It's a lot more quiet. So there will be times when, something will trigger an intrusive thought, and then I'll kind of start to go down that staircase, but I'm able to like notice it a lot faster. I'm able to really use the tools that I know help. I'm able to actually do an exposure with myself, or sit with the uncertainty, or kind of use some kind of non-engagement response, so I don't end up getting to a place where it becomes a theme, or where it becomes like a flare up. So
That's incredible.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to hear that, by the way. That's and hopefully really encouraging for listeners as well to make that step if they haven't already, to go and get medication, because it has genuinely sounded life-changing for you. Like, you've obviously done things that you would have never dreamed of doing, like setting up your own practice. There's probably so many things that were holding you back, and I think one of the common things with any mental health issue is that we want to do things, but we never feel like we can do that thing, and there's already so much going on in our head that we can't really focus on one thing at once. So you starting your business was probably always a dream, but there were so many other things going on around that you couldn't fully put your focus onto that. So it sounds to me like this medication has made things a bit clearer in your head, like less brain fog maybe. Is that right?
I think it's also just helped me realize that, like, I am able to feel anxious and nothing bad is going to happen. Because for so long, I just tried to avoid feeling any negative emotion, which is impossible for us, right? But it also does cause a lot of anxiety when you're just pushing away anger or sadness or disgust or whatever it is. And one thing that I think the medications have really helped me with is just learning to like accept when I feel anxious or accept when I feel angry, and kind of take action instead of just feeling like paralyzed.
Yeah. It's the whole like just it is what it is concept. Just let it happen. And I think with anxiety and OCD, we often ruminate so much over these thoughts, obsess over these thoughts, and becoming this just stuck in fear, and then it stops us from doing anything. So if we could just adopt that mindset, which is obviously you can do in therapy, but it's great that medications allowed you to adopt that even more, where it's just like, okay, it is okay to feel this, and let's just being with this, and it will be okay. Like, I am safe, which is really hard to achieve and maintain as well. But my other question was related to, so you mentioned flare-ups, OCD themed flare-ups. What would you say are some of the triggers for those flare-ups?
So for now, I've noticed anytime there's some sort of external stress going on in my life, so a tree falling on my house, or changing my job, or like things that are understandably stressful. Sometimes what I notice for me is like, instead of just accepting and being like, this is very stressful, I'm very stressed right now, I will kind of fixate on like, oh my God, what if I have oral cancer? And let me focus all on figuring that out. And then when I am able to be like, hey, you're starting to do that thing, maybe we can just bring yourself back to like, yes, you're really stressed right now. It makes sense that your OCD is trying to attach itself to something. How can we just like sit with the stress and uncertainty of life in general right now? And And that might also include the uncertainty of some health thing. But just bringing it back to like what is happening in the here and now, accepting what is happening in the here and now, sitting with the discomfort of it, and then feeling like, you know, no matter what happens, you're going to cope and you're going to get through it. I think that's been really helpful for me.
It's interesting because when I had the health related anxiety, it's funny when you say oral cancer, because I swear I've had every single cancer possible. Like it never has actually happened, but I've had everything that you could possibly have.
Yes.
And the hardest at the time, looking back, when you go through these periods where you think you have these health related issues, it seems so real. And obviously and at the time when it's really bad and you don't know how to manage it, it all seems so real. And the thing that you were mentioning there, which is so important with therapy over time, is to be able to just accept it. So like, okay, maybe I do have oral cancer. We are not certain of that right now. We don't actually know if I could have. I mean, there's a possibility, because you can't completely rule out that, which is the hardest thing to sit with, like the hardest thing to sit with. But we don't know. So let's just see.
Yeah.
But getting to that point is just so hard. Like whenever I have a health related theme and I have to tell myself, you could possibly have it, but we don't know. It's like,
I know.
And that's the uncertainty, that's the OCD uncertainty and anxiety as well, isn't it? Which is that, and anxiety is all related around uncertainty.
Yes.
So it's funny because most of the people I've had on here with OCD, seems like the health theme is really one of the most prominent ones that people experience. And it's the hardest one because it's physical. So everything that I don't know if it was the same for you, but it's the whole body checking, any sensation. And so you can't really get away from it, because if you feel something, then it's instantly triggering you to think that that's obviously related to that thing that you think that you now have, which is so it's a lot. But other than your the medication that you take, obviously you have therapy, you are a therapist, how else do you manage OCD on a daily basis?
One thing that has been helpful for me is to really find ways to get out of my head and get out of kind of this, because I spend a lot of time thinking about OCD, either working with people with OCD, making content on social media about OCD, being in my own OCD treatment and recovery. So I've really tried to like find other activities that I enjoy that bring me meaning. So I joined a choir recently. I am really wanting to get back into pottery. I want to kind of find other ways to find meaning and joy in my life.
Yeah.
Which can be really helpful, especially if I am experiencing a day where I'm feeling more anxious about something or I'm having more intrusive thoughts. It's nice to be able to still have other things to fill my time with. So yes, I can feel anxious. Yes, I can be worried that I might have this very specific health thing. I'm going to go to choir practice. I'm going to spend 3 hours
something else
singing. And then even I'm still going to be scared afterwards, but I will have enjoyed myself more over those 3 hours than I would have if I just like sat at home
in your room
and thought about it.
Yeah, completely. That's amazing. And before we finish, because I know we're tight for time now, and this conversation's been amazing, but just in terms of if there is somebody listening right now with OCD, what is one piece of advice that you would give them?
That's such a good question. And I could spend 3 hours saying a lot of things, but I think the biggest piece of advice I would hope someone with OCD would hear right now is that people with OCD tend to overestimate the likelihood that something bad is going to happen. And they also tend to underestimate their ability to cope with bad things happening. So with that information, I hope that if you're listening and you have OCD, that you remember that just because something is possible doesn't mean it's likely. And even if for some reason that 1% chance of scary thing does end up happening, you are much more equipped to navigate that than you probably think you are. So even if a tree does fall on your house and you have to live in a hotel for 4 weeks, you will get through that. It'll suck, but you can get through that. And even if something else happens, you are really capable. And I think those of us with anxiety and OCD really underestimate our ability to get through things. And I think we could all benefit from feeling a little bit more confident in ourselves, because we're awesome and we are strong and we are capable.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will really help whoever is listening right now. And just the final thing as well is, I know we've not had a huge amount of time to talk about it today. Me and Juliet have been on a bit of a we've not had a bit of a shortened time, but Juliet is a therapist. She is based in the United States, and I'm going to leave your information
Thank you.
in the description, in the bio of this Spotify, to your Instagram, and any other related links to your therapy pages, so that anybody who might need some help with specifically OCD therapy can reach out to you.
Thank you so much. It was so fun being here. I've loved our chat.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode today. I hope this episode has resonated with you and offered insights, comfort, and most importantly, the knowledge that you are not alone. Remember, your mental health journey is unique, just like you are. It's okay to have good days and bad days, and it's okay to seek help and support when you need it. You are strong, resilient, and capable of navigating life's challenges. If you found value in today's episode, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to hear more about specific topics or have any questions, please leave a comment below. We're here to support and empower each other. Together, we can break the stigma surrounding mental health and create a more compassionate and understanding world. If you haven't already, please do check out our Facebook community group, which is a non-judgmental space for you guys to share your stories, experiences, and support each other. As we close the episode, please do remember to take a moment for some self-care, whether it's a deep breath, a walk in nature, or a simple act of kindness to yourself. Remember to nurture your mental well-being after these conversations. Thank you so much for being part of our community. I appreciate you all so much. And also, if you are listening and feel like you could have a story to share, please do drop me a Instagram message, email me at info@vitamindose.co, or you can also go to the website and fill in a form at www.vitamindose.co. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.